Hey everyone, I am the Closet Catholic, and today I wanted to share an update on where I'm at, some things that have been going on, and also a little bit about where this channel is going and some content that will be coming up in the future. So let's get into it. So I'll start with some exciting news, which is that I recently started RCIA. So that's fun and a new experience for me. It's been good. It's been very interesting in terms of some of the things I've had to wrestle with. Nothing really with the content of RCIA. A lot of it is stuff I'm already familiar with. It's been very basic so far. And one thing that is quite fascinating about this process is seeing how many people start RCIA and aren't all that familiar with the Catholic faith. It's not really what I expected. I assumed RCIA was more for people who had gotten to the point where they were ready to convert, and so it was more like kind of just a formality. I know that's a bit reductionist on my part, like a very minimal understanding, but I wasn't raised Catholic, so I'm just going with my assumption. For me, it's a bit different though, because being a pastor, I had to wrestle with a lot of things beforehand. And so once I got to the place where I was considering starting RCIA, I had to know for sure that this is the direction I was going to go in, that the end result was going to be, yes, I'm going to convert to Catholicism. That's attending RCIA is not something that any Protestant wants to see their pastor going through. That pretty much puts you on the chopping block in terms of your credentials. So that's been an interesting part of the process. Another thing, though, that came up in RCIA was the first large session that I was a part of. They went through kind of a history of how the Bible developed and touched on things like the Deuterocanon and a little bit with church councils and stuff like that. And those are things that I'm very interested in. My background is biblical studies. I have a bachelor's in that. I actually, once I finished my master's work, I actually applied to do PhD work in Old Testament, specifically around the time of the Late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, and that transitional period. I'm just fascinated by that stuff, and I love scripture, and actually the Deuterocanon was one of the major turning points for me in realizing the truth of the Catholic faith. But what stood out to me in that session was something very unique about a pastor becoming Catholic. And I actually talked with the director of RCIA about this because I felt it was worth mentioning. It was something I was really wrestling with, which is how isolating this process is. Not just from the sense of most of the people in my social circle right now, I can't really talk to about this because there could be negative consequences for me, and I'm just not really ready to wrestle with a lot of the issues that could come up, and I'm sure the numerous meetings people would want to have with me. But it's also isolating in the sense that I'm really in a place where I'm wrestling with who am I right now? Because for the last 13 years at least, my entire life has revolved around God has called me to serve his church. And my understanding of that was, in a vocational sense, to be a pastor, was to be a spiritual leader for other people, in particular serving in a local church context. And so I've been preaching for the last 13 years, traveling preaching and then preaching at a local church. I've done missionary work. I've taught stuff in scripture. I've taught the Bible itself. In fact, recently, just within the last year, I was teaching classes for other people who are considering ministry. So I was actually working for my denomination, teaching classes for people being considered for a minister's license, then also ordination for them. And one of those classes was teaching biblical hermeneutics, or how to study the Bible. So that was something that was very important to me. But now here I am basically back at phase one, going through like introductory courses like Christianity 101. Um, and it's been a struggle. It's really been a struggle for me, emotionally, spiritually, somewhat vocationally. I mean, I have a job now that helps keep a roof over uh, me and my family now that I'm not working as a pastor, and I'll get to that in a second. But yeah, the RCIA process has been very fascinating for me, and it's been a struggle that I wasn't really, in some ways, I wasn't expecting. Like, I was not expecting to be wrestling with stuff like this. It just never really came to mind until I was sitting there, um, being taught things that I'm like, geez, like I teach this stuff, and I'm having someone else teach it to me, like I'm a beginner. I'm not knocking the process at all. I totally understand it, and I respect the process. I'm not looking for a special treatment or anything like that. But it's a struggling position for me to be in, and a very humbling one. So I guess I'm grateful for the opportunity to grow in the virtue of humility. And if this is my cross to bear for a season, then I'll bear it. And I was very encouraged, actually, in my conversation with the director of RCIA. They told me, you know what, like there is a place for you in the Catholic Church to serve, and to apply your experiences and your strengths and your background. And that was something that I'm sure for a lot of you listening is like, well, duh, like that's pretty basic. But for me, like I had no idea. Like I'm still trying to understand the inner workings of the Catholic Church. I understand a lot of the theology. I understand a lot of the history. But in terms of how can I function in the Catholic Church, like making it much more personal, that's something that I'm very much ignorant of. Like I'm not really sure. There's certain levels of exclusion in the Catholic Church, as you find anywhere else, right? Like they're not going to have a non-Catholic leading Bible studies. That's just kind of weird. Or maybe they would. I don't know. But again, that goes back to my ignorance of the situation. So I'm still trying to wrestle with that, trying to figure all that out. And I'm glad I had that conversation, at least got the ball rolling on, at least they're aware that, of my background. So when the time comes and I'm confirmed, I could follow up on that and see, what does it look like now? Because I still feel this, I sort of call it a pastoral impulse that I've always had this desire to serve the body of Christ and to serve the church, however that looks. But now it's just, wrestling with, okay, but what does that mean for me in the Catholic Church? Because I can't serve the way that I served while I was a Protestant pastor. Which, by the way, this is so weird to talk about, like Protestant pastor in the past tense, Catholic in present tense, because I'm still in this awkward transition period where I'm not really sure how to define where I am. Like, am I still Protestant? Well, I guess so, because I'm still technically ordained. But I don't agree with Protestantism, and I'm leaving that, and I'm becoming Catholic, but I'm not yet Catholic. Like, I'm not confirmed. So I'm not in full communion with the Catholic Church. So it's weird. Anyways, so yeah, so that's a part of the RCIA process that's been a major focal point for me right now and trying to understand and explore and really pray about. So yeah, I mean, if you want to be involved in some way in my life, I guess you could pray for that, as discernment and understanding that. So that's sort of the RCIA thing. So I am starting that. I'm taking intentional steps towards becoming Catholic. This isn't just in the realm of exploration for me anymore. It's going to be a real thing. And that brings me to a second point that I want to talk about, which is a comment that someone left on my welcome video, where they asked me if I was concerned that some of my congregants would find out that I'm becoming Catholic because of this YouTube channel. Like if someone stumbled upon it and realized, there's our pastor, this is concerning for us, and then I would get, be put on the chopping block as a result. And I appreciate that question, and I responded to it. So if you want to go back and look at that, but I want to expand on that a little bit. So I'm actually in a very unique position, ministry wise, right now. So up until about 3 years ago, I was serving as the pastor of a small church. So I was like the pastor of that church, and I was leading that congregation. And like they were providing, there was a house that the church owned that I lived in, and they were providing me a salary. But then 3 years ago, I moved to where I currently live to pioneer a new ministry that wasn't directly connected to any local church. So I was doing this under the supervision and authority, and under the support of, in Catholicism, it's essentially a diocese, is a good way to describe the leadership I was working under. But the way my denomination functions, my minister's license had to be connected to a local church. So I was considered a volunteer staff pastor at one of our churches, even though I didn't have any real responsibilities there. But I was listed on their staff roll, but they didn't pay me. It was just to validate that, yes, I am a pastor in this denomination. But several months ago, the new leadership for my denomination that I was working under changed, and they decided to eliminate the ministry that I had been working on for about 3 years. So effectively, I no longer had an income connected to my role as a pastor, and that ministry just dissolved. As a result of that, I kind of stepped back for a little bit, which a lot of people understood. It was a very difficult situation for a lot of people, especially my ministry board members, one of whom was the pastor I worked under at this other local church. And over time, I just kind of stopped attending that local church because I was like, you know what? I've been exploring Catholicism for a while. I really feel this is where God's been leading me. Since around a year and a half before my ministry dissolved. So I was like, okay, well, now I can actually start taking steps towards Catholicism because I'm not financially tied to my role as a pastor anymore. I wasn't getting paid anything because that ministry didn't exist anymore that was paying me. And I didn't have any responsibilities at the local church I was attending and where I was technically a pastor at, even though I was in a volunteer capacity as a staff pastor. So I started attending Catholic Mass, usually during the weekdays, but I would attend a Sunday Mass when I could. And over time, I just sort of stopped being a part of that local church where I was a volunteer staff pastor. And that pastor actually was familiar with this process for me. I'd let him know once it started, becoming more of a prominent thing. And he's very discreet. He didn't tell anyone about it. He still hasn't told anyone about it. He's still aware that I'm going through this process. He's aware that I'm starting RCIA. So he's been very respectful about that, which I'm incredibly grateful for. And so I was very quietly removed from the staff listing. My contact information was no longer in the weekly bulletin. I wasn't listed anywhere. I wasn't a part of weekly staff meetings anymore. So to answer that question, am I concerned that, I guess I'll open it up, that members of my denomination might see these videos, see this channel, and be concerned that I'm becoming Catholic when they think I'm still a pastor of my denomination? Not really, because I'm not formally connected to any local church. I don't have any responsibilities in the denomination. I'm just kind of floating around right now. I am ordained, which affords me some flexibility. Like I don't have to appear before any sort of credential board. I don't have to go through an interview to renew a license or anything, which has been interesting. And actually a very interesting part of this process is after my ministry was dissolved by my denominational leadership, I haven't heard anything from them since that happened, which I find odd, given some of the reasons of why they dissolved the ministry. I'm like, really, you don't even bother to check in, see how I'm doing, send an email or a text or anything, but whatever. I consider it a blessing at this point because they wouldn't like to hear how I'm doing, especially in regards to ministry. But that's beside the point. And really, the worst case scenario, if someone from my denomination stumbles upon this and makes a big fuss about it, is they'll revoke my credentials and I'll no longer be considered ordained, which, I mean, doesn't mean anything for me at this point. In looking back on, the historical validity of my denomination, I don't even consider my ordination valid anyways. It certainly doesn't have any historical grounding. So that's really the worst that can happen because I'm not financially tied to anything. My denomination doesn't pay me anything in any sort of fashion. So no, I'm not really concerned about it. Like it might hurt my reputation if someone found out about it. Maybe they would accuse me of being deceptive or something. But again, this is part of the reason why I started this channel, is because pastors who are going through this process, Protestant pastors becoming Catholic, cannot talk about this openly. It is a very private struggle because there's a lot at stake. I mean, people will lose their livelihood if the wrong person finds out they're even considering Catholicism. So I'm in a very privileged position in that sense because I really don't have anything to lose by talking about it. Now, I'm not sharing this on my social medias. I'm not sharing any of my personal information, especially with you guys. And no one knows about this channel except people who stumble upon it, who are already interested in Catholicism, I guess, and people that I directly share this channel with. So yeah, in that sense, I see that there is some value to what I'm doing. Sorry, I have a baby monitor here because my child is taking a nap, which is partly why I don't have a lot of video content coming out very frequently, because a lot of the time I'm actually a stay-at-home dad, and my child keeps me busy, which is a great joy. But all right, so I guess that sort of wraps up that part of sort of the background on what it's like being a pastor and where I'm at. Like, if I'm discovered, what's going to happen? I'm not too concerned about it, but I still want to use my position as currently an ordained pastor to kind of shed light on what this process is like, and maybe possibly be a voice for people who just simply can't take the risk of saying anything. Which is why I haven't said anything openly about this prior to now, because now I'm actually in a position where I can talk about it with essentially no real risk. So, okay. So now I want to transition into some updates about the channel. So I'm not really sure how to discuss this, so I'll just start off. I do not like editing videos, so I'm going to try to change the format of how I do these. Maybe incorporate some slides and just do kind of like what Michael Lofton does at Reason and Theology, where he just turns the camera on, starts recording, and he has a bunch of material already prepared, and he just sort of, goes through it. Obviously, my videos will not be like 2 or 3 hours. I don't have a lot to say. So, but essentially that kind of format, where I'm not going to just sort of sit down and start recording and then go back and do a bunch of edits of the video to make it a little bit more seamless, make it less obvious that sometimes I do awkward pauses. So I might do that. And, maybe that's a mistake of focusing on quantity over quality. But the truth is, it's really hard to be disciplined in developing content and doing recording and putting videos out when you're on a really weird schedule, especially since I only have maybe 3 solid hours a week to do anything. And when it takes like a month to get a video out and most of that time is spent editing, it's pretty exhausting to try and, stay motivated and to, stay on top of things. And it gets pretty discouraging. So I might just, change the format a little bit. I am planning on continuing the My Journey series. The next one is on something. It's on something. I don't have it in front of me. But I'll get that put together and I'll get that out hopefully in the next few weeks, depending on how things go. Actually, you know what? That might not be possible. But, no, I could. Maybe I'll get it done next week. I don't know. We'll see. C'est la vie. But, yeah, so I'll start getting that stuff out. Thank you, by the way, for the subscribes. Thanks for that. Thank you for the likes. Thank you for the comments, too. I enjoy engaging with comments. So, keep them coming. If you have any questions for me or anything you want to say, you could do that. I also link my email in the description if you want to send anything that way. You could do that too. So that is going to be it for me today. Just thought I'd share some updates with you because I don't have the next video ready, and I thought, I got some stuff in my mind I want to share, so I'll just do that. And so yeah, that being said, thanks for the time, and I will see you around the Tiber.